It started really in 1956. There was a series of murders occurred, which terrorized the state of Connecticut. The papers were filled with the mad dog killers.
And they'd just walk in, pull out a gun, and say, "This is a stick-up." And always, before they went for the money, they would pistol whip or blackjack or just shoot the victim. And any customer that happened to be there would go down with them.
They were usually the owners of small convenience stores or gas stations or liquor stores.
Storekeepers were arming themselves with guns or getting dogs or locking the doors. They wouldn't let anybody in except a customer they knew. And this fear that people had mounted with each new killing, all random. You never know where they were going to strike next. It started here at this gas station on Stanley Street in New Britain. This was the first of a series of murders which occurred during the next several months, in which they killed a total of 7 people, netted about $308, I think it was, that they got out of all these robberies. But in addition to the 7 that they killed, they left a wake of probably another 7 or 8 people who they pistol whipped and blackjacked and left for dead after firing a bullet at them. Sam Rome was assigned to the case after this particular murder. Sam was in command of the Detective Bureau for the state police. He was Hollywood's version, really, of a colorful cop. He wore a snap-brim fedora. He always had a cigar in his mouth, unlighted, he called his pacifier. And he was very articulate, a very cunning individual, and frequently unorthodox, to the point where he became very controversial. A lot of his arrests and convictions were challenged in the courts.
Sam Rome suspected Joseph Taborsky, who had spent 4 years on death row for a 1950 West Hartford murder. Taborsky had been set free after a Connecticut Supreme Court decision cited the state's use of the testimony of his brother, later shown to be insane, to convict him. Rome finally broke the case when he interviewed Frank Adinolfi, the owner of a North Haven shoe store, who had survived a pistol whipping and shooting.
So Sam said, "What did these guys say when they came into the store?" He said, "They said they wanted to buy a pair of shoes." Did they mention a size? Guys, yeah, size 12. Sam said to me, "Who do you know wears size 12 shoes?" I said, "I know what you mean, Joe Taborsky," but it couldn't be him. You know, here's a guy just got out of death row. But on that hunch, Sam got a picture in which Joe Taborsky, Albert Taborsky, his brother, Colome, Arthur Colome, and a couple of others who had robbed a Dairy Mart in Hartford. And he brought that picture to Adinolfi. He said, he pointed to Joe Taborsky. He says, "Is this the fellow that shot you?" He said, "I don't know about him, but I know this other guy was the guy." And he pointed to Colome. That put him onto Colome.
Arthur Colome was an ex-convict who had been involved in several armed robberies in the Hartford area. He had an IQ of 64 and was illiterate.
As soon as he was apprehended by the police, he asked for a lawyer. And the detective, Sam Rome, said, "Well, we don't choose who your lawyer is. Who do you want as a lawyer?" And he said, and he offered him, Sam Rome offered Colome a telephone directory, but he knew that Colome couldn't read. So that request of Colome for a lawyer was simply not acted on by the police. A series of interrogations occurred, which stretched from a Saturday to the following Wednesday. He was interrogated at night and during the day. His wife came to see him at the implication of Rome, and his wife begged him to tell the truth. He saw his children during this time.
On Tuesday, however, he cracked and said that he and Joe were the killers. So confronted with that, Joe still wouldn't confess. Joe had a hatred of society, but he loved his mother. And Sam brought the mother to headquarters, showed her Arthur's confession, and now confronted Taborsky with his mother, who said, "I've seen the evidence, Mr. Rome showed it to me, I know you did these killings, I now want you to confess." And he says, "I didn't do these things, Ma." She says, "I know you did, and I don't care what you've done, but you don't lie to me, and if you do, you're no longer my son." That did it. He went to pieces, started crying, threw his arms around, and said, "Yes, I did these things."
A Superior Court jury convicted Colome and Taborsky primarily on their confessions. Because they were sentenced to death, there was an automatic appeal to the state Supreme Court, which upheld the convictions.
Then Taborsky gave up, and eventually Taborsky was executed. He was the last person executed in Connecticut. But Colome, through a public defender, brought his case to the United States Supreme Court.
And the court said, look, we will notice the fact that he's a mental defective, that his IQ placed him in the moron category, literally. And given his limited IQ, holding him for that many days, denying him a right to see his counsel, and then persistently questioning him, all of the circumstances, the court said, rendered his confession involuntary.
And looking at this totality of circumstances, the Supreme Court ruled that their constitutional rights had been trampled by Sam Rome. And the case was sent back for a retrial. And Colome, because the confessions now were worthless, they couldn't convict these two guys. They had no ballistics, they had no bullets, because all the bullets had been shattered going through skulls. They had the confession only. Colome could have gone free. Instead, he elected to plead guilty to second-degree murder, chiefly because he was afraid to come out into society. The day he was brought here for the reenactment of the crime, there were probably 500 people dangling ropes and hollering, let's lynch these guys, you know, and he was scared to death over that. And he said, I'd rather stay in prison.
Shortly after Colome, the Supreme Court, I'm sure influenced in part by cases like Colome, said, look, what we really ought to do is have clear rules. And one of the rules we'll have, implementing the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution, which says you can't be required to incriminate yourself. One of the rules we'll have is a rule that says every police officer in America, when they question a person, is going to have to tell them certain rights, is going to have to tell them they have a right to remain silent, that anything they say may be used against them, and that they have a right to consult with an attorney before any questioning. That's the Miranda case that came many years later. It was the Colome case that showed the court the need to have the Miranda decision.